Hey YouTube, what's going on? Abyssal Wave here, and today I'm going to be going over an Unholy guide for patch 7.2.5. However, this is pre-Tomb of Sargeras, so things will change for Tomb of Sargeras. I will do another one once we get tier, and once we get Tomb of Sargeras trinkets, but for now, this is a good build, or a good amount of builds. I'm going to be going over three, so there's 3 good builds that you can use for the next week, and at the beginning of Tomb of Sargeras before you get your tier sets. Without further ado, let's get into it. So the first build I obviously have up here is the Dark Arbiter build. So this has been made viable with the buff to the shoulders and also the buff to Dark Arbiter itself. So the buff to Dark Arbiter was it used to last 15 seconds, now it lasts 20 seconds. That extra 5 seconds is a lot of time, and that's a lot of extra damage. So it really does do a ton of burst now. And not only that, with Convergence of Fate reducing the cooldown of Dark Arbiter, you're able to have this up every minute and a half, which is amazing now because that synergizes with Apocalypse, which also synergizes with Dark Transformation. So you can use all 3 of these every minute and a half, which is just an enormous amount of damage because, of course, you have the buff if you have the shoulders. If you do not have Tact Theratrix's shoulders and you do not have a Convergence of Fate, this is a very difficult build to run. If you don't have a Convergence, then you're going to have to wait an extra 30 seconds with Apocalypse, and you're also going to have Dark Arbiter off a cooldown every 2 minutes instead of every minute and a half. Significantly reduces the damage that you'll do. And also, if you do not have the shoulders, then you just don't get that extra 40% damage buff, which is huge with the Dark Arbiter itself, and also huge with the minions. So this is very, very pivotal legendary for the build. I recommend not running the build if you do not have either of these. If you don't have the shoulders, I also still recommend using another build that I'll talk about in a bit, but this is an amazing build right now, and it's so much fun. But let's get into the actual talents. So as you see here are my talents. I run Ebon Fever, Pestilent Pustules, Unholy Frenzy, Sludge Belcher. I can run either Lingering Apparition or Spell Eater. Either one works. If you have a fight with tough amount of movement, like I had this up still from Gul'dan and Helya, so I really want to run Lingering Apparition for that because the reduced cooldown of Wraithwalk and also the increased movement speed is very great. But if a fight has very minimal movement, like a fight like Croesus, I'd say, then Spell Eater is an incredible talent to run as well. I run Shadow Infusion, but you can also run Infected Claws. Infected Claws is an amazing talent to run for this. However, I just like Shadow Infusion because I like the synergy with the 4th golden trait that Unholy DKs have, and I'm finding that I'm able to have this up twice before every Dark Arbiter, which is really nice. I have it up and then I have it up again for my Dark Arbiter. I might have to hold off an extra 5 seconds, but it's still an amazing talent, and I really enjoy playing with this as opposed to Infected Claws. And then last, of course, we have Dark Arbiter. You have to run that for this build. This is such a cool talent. It replaces your Summon Gargoyle. That's why, you don't see Summon Gargoyle on your bars anymore. But this is only up for 20 seconds as opposed to Gargoyle's normal 40 seconds. And this thing does so much damage. Every time you use a Death Coil, it increases the damage it does by 45. Every time you get a Sudden Doom proc and use that Death Coil, again, it does proc it, the increased damage for Dark Arbiter, another 45. I think Dark Sucker also does proc it. Dark Sucker is whenever you kill something, you get a free proc of Death Strike. It also gives you another 45 runic power. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that is a lot of extra damage. And when you pop a lot of your wounds with Unholy Frenzy up, then you just get an enormous amount of Sudden Doom stacks. So without further, let's get into the actual rotation. So I'm going to start with my Ghoul up, of course, and I'm going to use Army. Wait 7 seconds. I usually wait about 6 to 7 seconds. That's when I use my Army on the pulldown timer. So I'm just waiting, and then I move in. Apply my Plagues. Now, I didn't really get a good amount of Festering Strikes there, so I'm going to wait because I want to pop 6 wounds as opposed to 4 because that gives me every bit of value out of my my Apocalypse. So that's definitely what I would recommend. And then I reapply my Plagues. I get Sudden Doom stacks there. Nice. I'm still getting them, and as you can see here, I've already spent 360 runic power into this. I get another Sudden Doom stack. I'm up to 450. Can I get any more? You can usually, with Heroism, get about 500 to 600 runic power spent in your Dark Arbiter, which is a ton of damage. But as you can see, that is the rotation that you want to follow if you do have the shoulders. If you don't have the shoulders, but you still want to run the build, which is definitely viable, then obviously you're going to use your Dark Transformation before your Dark Arbiter and before your Apocalypse, because you're not going to get the increased damage. So it doesn't even matter. You just probably want to use it first, because it is nice to do it before you start to generate the Festering Strikes. It doesn't cost any runes, and it is an increase in damage there, and you'll have it up early or later on, because you don't have to synergize it if you are not running the shoulders. The only reason you use the Dark Transformation after Apocalypse and Dark Arbiter is to get the damage buff. Also, it does buff your Army of the Dead, so that is an amazing bonus with that as well. The shoulders are just amazing with this build. I highly recommend, if you're an Unholy DK, trying to get the shoulders. That means like rolling relinquished tokens and trying to get the shoulders. It's just incredible. So this is definitely, personally, my most enjoyed build so far in patch 7.2.5. Some other things with this build is you can run Blighted Rune Weapon. It does make the opener a little bit more forgiving, because as you see there, I got the 2 lowest amounts on my first 2 Festering Strikes. So I only got 4 wounds off my first 2 Festering Strikes, which means I had to wait 5 seconds in order for another Festering Strike or enough runes to use another Festering Strike to come off cooldown. And that significantly reduces my damage, because I have to wait that extra 5 seconds storing Heroism or something like that. It's just awful. So Blighted Rune Weapon is a great talent to run for this as well. So that's definitely something that you can do. And you can also run Bursting Swords if there's a lot of cleave. But personally, I'm enjoying Ebon Fever a little more. I think it's a little more reliable. The next build I'm going to be showing here is the Soul Reaper build. So for those of you who do not have the shoulders, obviously I'm going to be wearing the shoulders for this, but I'm not going to be using Dark Transformation afterwards, because if you do have shoulders, of course you'd be running Dark Arbiter. So I'm going to show it like you don't have the shoulders, even though I would get that damage bonus afterwards. But this build, you don't need any of these Unholy specific legendaries. You can just run this with 0 of them. You can run them with basically stat stick legendaries. You can run it with Cape Trinket, you can run it with Cape, Magnum Opus, whatever floats your boat, you can run this build. It is an incredibly powerful build. However, you do want to stack a lot of mastery. As you can see here, I have 88% mastery. That's quite a lot. You can even go higher than that, but however, because I did not main Unholy DK and Nighthold, I didn't get priority on heavy mastery loot. So I do only have 88%. Of course, you can get higher, but this build is in my opinion, a pretty dull build, but it does offer a lot of damage. Of course, the differences between this and the Dark Arbiter build are, of course, Soul Reaper being used over Dark Arbiter. You do run Infecting Claws over Shadow Infusion or Necrosis. If it's straight up single target, Necrosis sometimes wins, but with the changes to Necrosis, or the changes to Death Coil costing 45 runic power as opposed to 35, it's just not worth running anymore. Infected Claws does win out now. And then, of course, Clawing Shadows over Unholy Frenzy. Clawing Shadows, since you're stacking mastery, just does a ton of damage. And Holy Frenzy, of course, you're not getting the maximum value out of it that you do with Dark Arbiter, because you really want Unholy Frenzy for the increased Sudden Doom procs, and you want to really unload into your Arbiter. But with this, you don't really need those Sudden Doom procs, so Unholy Frenzy doesn't have as much value. And of course, you can run Bursting Swords. I personally, again, like running Ebon Fever. However, Bursting Swords can sometimes win out in heavy cleave fights. But without further ado, let's show you guys the actual rotation for this. Of course, we're going to start with our Army of the Dead, and then when we're going in, we're waiting until we're about to go in, and then we summon our Gargoyle. Dark Transformation, you can do that any rate. Apply our Plague, Soul Reaper, Apocalypse, and then just follow our priority rotation, Clawing Shadows whenever we can. And then during your pull, it's okay to kind of overcap on runic power, but you want to be very careful of that. And then we're just following this, reapply our Viral Plague. And then we're just following, we capped out there. We almost overcapped, but we didn't overcap. So then we're just following our rotation. As you can see, Soul Reaper is out, but I'm still getting a decent amount of damage in. So this build does offer less burst than the Dark Arbiter build. However, even though it does offer less burst, it is very consistent because I am coming up on my next burst phase. So I'm making sure that I have runes up for that and wounds. And then I get 3 Clawing Shadows in with my wounds up, and then I have my 3 stacks of Soul Reaper again. And then, I just keep following my rotation. As you can see, the damage is of course less with this build. You peak out at about 1.2 mil-ish. It's not crazy high like it normally is, but it's still a good damage build. And of course, again, you do not need any DK or Unholy specific legendaries for this build. It is an incredibly powerful build, even in and of itself, just with the build itself. So again, stack mastery, and you can run this build pretty easily, and you'll do quite a bit of damage. As you can see, of course, my damage is pretty even instead of having most of my damage being one ability, which is kind of nice, and it does offer good consistency in Mythic Plus as well. And the last build I'm going to go over is the Defile build. So this build does require Legendary to be competitive, and I'm going to bring that up now. And the Legendary that it requires is Death March. The reason you really need this Legendary to run this build is because the reduced cooldown of Defile or Death and Decay is reduced by 2 seconds every time you Death go a Death Strike. Of course, really you're going to only be Death Striking when you get Dark Sucker, but Death Coiling every couple of seconds does make this go from a 33% uptime to a 70 to 80% uptime, and Defile does give you a decent amount of mastery. During Heroism, you can just inevitably have this up for 30 seconds straight. It's crazy how much reduced cooldown this does give, and it does make this build actually viable. If you don't have Death March, I recommend not running this build and running the Soul Reaper build. However, if you do have this build and you even have something like Instructor's Fourth Lesson to pair with it for now, then you will do an insane amount of damage. Even having something like Soul of the Death Lord as well, you will just do so much damage. It's really a very fun build on AoE. It's incredible in Mythic Plus. If you do have the helmet, you run this build for Mythic Plus, you will just destroy trash packs, which I do find quite enjoyable. I have seen Unholy DKs with this build in Mythic Plus, and they're able to sustain insane amount of damage on trash packs. So without further ado, let's go into the actual rotation. To start off the rotation, of course, we use our Army of the Dead, summon our pet. I do that whenever, just as long as you don't do it during the pool. And then we run in. We can use any of our other abilities first. And then when I want to, pop my Defile, start laying in. Get that down, get my Apocalypse, get my Gargoyle. You can do your Gargoyle earlier, doesn't really matter. And then throw my Plague up. And then just follow that rotation. Really, this build, it's okay if you don't have the the legendary for it, but it just becomes so much better when you do. It really does. And personally, I do find the build to be quite fun because I do like how much AoE it does have. Running this on something like Score Byron is pretty incredible. But again, this build is very temperamental where it does require Legendary. And that's really the case with Unholy DKs now. 2 of the builds require 2 Legendaries in order to run it. Well, 1 each in order to run them, or else they just won't be very viable. So if you don't have either the shoulders or you don't have the helmet, then just run the Soul Reaper build. You will still do an enormous amount of damage. But if you do have either of those, you can choose either build and you will do an insane more amount of damage. Of course, with the Soul Reaper build, you're still able to be competitive. But with those 2 legendaries, you are able to push with the more fun, meme-worthy builds. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video and found it useful at all. If you have any questions, post them down in the comments below. And I will be doing an updated version of this when we get our tier sets and everything and our new trinkets in Tomb of Sargeras. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys later.